The most powerful signal inside a centuries-old monarchy is rarely delivered through a grand public speech, a glittering crown, or an official royal decree. Sometimes, the most devastating declaration is delivered through something as simple as a chair. This week, as a final seating plan for the official state banquet was laid out across the polished desks of Buckingham Palace, one silent adjustment sent a shockwave through the royal household. Queen Camilla was quietly removed from King Charles's immediate side and was instructed to sit directly beside the king instead. When the revised seating card reached King Charles, he did not speak. He stared down at the names once, and then again, as if the paper itself had turned freezing cold in his hands. A state banquet is not merely a dinner with fine dining and polite diplomatic conversations. Inside palace walls, every seat tells a story. Every position communicates power, and every proximity signals who is trusted, who is protected, and who holds true influence. Moving Princess and closer to the king was no mistake. Moving Queen Camilla further away was no accident. The seating arrangement had become an undeniable institutional declaration. Camilla received the official update in total privacy. For a long moment, she stood completely still, holding the notification note with her eyes locked on the space where her name was supposed to be. As queen consort, she understood the painful wound beneath the formal wording. This was not a routine logistical change. This was proximity being taken away at a moment when closeness meant everything. She had stood by Charles through decades of harsh public judgment, fierce scrutiny, and constant doubt about whether she belonged at the center of the royal family. Now, another woman was taking the seat where the world expected Camilla to be. Princess and received the news in a very different manner. There was no grand announcement, no dramatic presentation, and no elaborate protocol. A senior palace official simply approached her and stated that His Majesty would require her presence directly at his side for the evening, and absorbed the instruction without any sign of triumph or satisfaction. Throughout her entire life, Princess has consistently refused personal drama, which made this moment even sharper. She did not question why Camilla had been moved, nor did she ask who approved the change. She simply accepted the duty, knowing that when the crown calls, personal emotions must wait outside. Shortly after, a quiet gesture made the decision feel absolute. An aide opened the official event folder, removed Camilla's original place card, and slipped beneath a stack of administrative papers. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. King Charles watched the moment unfold and realized that the palace machine had crossed a line it could not uncross. What seemed like a minor seating adjustment on paper had transformed into a silent test of loyalty and institutional stability. Behind the heavy wooden doors of the palace, three key figures carried three vastly different burdens. King Charles urgently needed steadiness. Queen Camilla desperately needed public recognition and reassurance. Princess needed nothing at all, and that unique indifference was precisely what made her the most powerful figure in the room. For a king navigating the heavy pressures of age, ongoing health concerns, family fractures, and persistent public scrutiny, the person sitting next to him had to look completely unshakable. The roots of this sudden decision traced back to a private diplomatic reception held 3 nights prior. What began as a brief exchange of a formal receiving line quickly escalated into a tense moment when a question arose regarding who would accompany the king through the greeting sequence and offered a quiet confirmation of her duties. However, Camilla interrupted, asserting that Charles would not require additional support because she would be there. The statement, though polished on the surface, felt like a visible challenge of authority in front of senior guests, and remained composed and silent, allowing the moment to speak for itself. By the following morning, a private note summarizing the encounter reached the king's official dispatch box with the phrase, "A visible confusion of authority." Those words shifted everything. What was once a subtle personal friction became an institutional issue demanding immediate correction. The subtle breach of authority during the diplomatic reception was not an isolated incident. It was a spark that ignited a long simmering confrontation within the highest corridors of royal power. Following the arrival of the red box dispatch note, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace became thick with unspoken tension. Camilla understood that the note had fundamentally transformed a personal friction into an official institutional problem. She did not blame the palace advisors, nor did she request a memorandum to be discarded. Instead, she asked for a direct meeting with Princess N. The queen consort recognized that the conflict had moved beyond administrative paperwork and had become deeply personal. Someone needed to speak aloud what the palace had already decided in silence. That request led to the private confrontation the royal household had feared most. Two resolute royal women, a deeply conflicted king, and a reality that no polite protocol language could soften. The encounter did not take place in a grand ballroom under glittering chandeliers or in front of cameras. It occurred within the quiet walls of a smaller private sitting room, a space where rank and title could not fully shield anyone from the emotional weight of the truth. Camilla entered the room with her composure held tight, but the hurt was already visible in her posture before she spoke a single word. Charles had permitted the meeting because he believed that maintaining silence would only deepen the injury. He knew Camilla would feel publicly corrected. He knew and would feel unfairly questioned. And he understood that the crown had placed all three of them in a position where no simple answer could sound gentle. Camilla looked directly at Princess and then asked a question that had been building since the altered seating plan first arrived. "Was this your doing?" The words were sharp, but the pain beneath them was sharper. She was not merely asking whether and had sought the seat next to Charles. She was asking whether and had allowed the palace machinery to use her presence as proof that Camilla could be set aside. After spending decades battling for public legitimacy and respect, Camilla felt the cold, lingering shadow of past uncertainties returning in full force. Princess did not flinch, nor did she answer in haste. She allowed the heavy accusation to linger in the air, knowing that a defensive response would only resemble guilt. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a steady, unyielding calm that made her position almost impossible to challenge. She looked at Camilla and stated clearly that she had not asked for the chair beside the king, but she would never refuse her brother if he required stability beside him during an official moment. That sentence cut deeper than any heated denial because it contained no personal ambition or vanity, and was not claiming a political victory. She was simply accepting an undeniable duty. King Charles listened to his sister's response and lowered his eyes, realizing that the truth could no longer be disguised. He openly admitted to Camilla that the seating alteration had been approved after the reception incident raised serious institutional concerns regarding public discipline around the monarch. In palace terminology, public discipline represents the visible order, control, and unity that protects the sovereign from appearing weak, uncertain, or divided in the eyes of the world. Camilla realized then that the decision was not about social preference or personal standing. It was far more serious, and was being trusted ceremonially in a way that Camilla was currently not. The seat beside Charles had become a public litmus test of reliability, and Camilla had only learned of the evaluation after the judgment had already been passed. Charles reached for his fountain pen, paused for a moment over the official document, and set it down with a quiet finality that silenced the entire room. He declared that the revised seating plan would remain as standing orders. That small sound of the pen striking the wooden table signaled the end of the debate. Behind his choice lay a force far greater than personal preference: the cold, unyielding self-preservation of the royal institution. Palace protocol officials had analyzed the upcoming state banquet and viewed it not as a celebratory dinner, but as a crucial test of stability. In sensitive times, protocol becomes an essential shield. The king required visible, unquestioned steadiness at his right hand. Princess became the definitive answer because her decades of service carried an authority that no one inside or outside the palace could easily question. For over 50 years, she had carried out the heaviest workloads without seeking applause or media spotlight. She was disciplined, composed, and virtually impossible to shake under pressure. In the harsh calculations of royal governance, Anne's quiet restraint had become her greatest power. As the advisory note placed in front of Charles explicitly stated, the monarch must be flanked by unquestioned steadiness. Those words carried the full weight of institutional judgment. They did not attack Camilla directly, but they left no room for compromise. Anne's presence beside the king was not implemented as a personal punishment for Camilla. It was instituted as a protective measure for the crown itself. The institutional judgment had been cast, but the true emotional consequence arrived quietly inside Queen Camilla's private dressing room, surrounded by silk diamonds and heavy silence. Her elegant evening gown had been pressed. Her choice of heritage jewels had been meticulously arranged, and her schedule for the night had been laid out with the comforting predictability of long-established routine. Then, the amended protocol card arrived, and the room's atmosphere altered instantly. Nothing shattered, and no one raised their voice. Yet every staff member present understood that the Queen's rightful position beside the King had been officially reassigned. Camilla sat perfectly still as the altar instructions were brought forward. The silence around her felt far more punishing than any loud argument could ever be. The royal dressing room was meant to be a space of preparation, a controlled environment where every visual detail was refined before a royal appeared before the public eye. Preparation represented absolute control, allowing the monarchy to present an image of seamless stability. However, at that moment, the attending staff were not merely adjusting fabrics, royal tiaras, or timing schedules. They were managing a public humiliation. Camilla's procession order had shifted. Her table placement had been altered, and her physical proximity to King Charles, the very element that validated her role, had been placed into another woman's hands. An aide stepped forward, reached for the tray beside her gloves, and removed the original seating card containing her name. Camilla watched without uttering a single word. That small piece of paper had carried far more than her identity. It carried official recognition. It had signaled to the entire room that she remained the woman closest to the king during one of the most significant ceremonial events of the year. Now, as it vanished beneath a stack of revised administrative documents, the queen consort recognized that the palace machine was enforcing a final decision. Camilla quietly asked the question everyone in the room had been attempting to avoid. Had King Charles approved the change himself? The response came softly, yet it landed like an unyielding verdict. Yes, His Majesty had personally initialed the document. Her expression shifted, not with immediate anger, but with deep, visible hurt. Anger might have offered protective barrier, but hurt exposed the vulnerability underneath. She had endured decades of harsh public judgment to earn her place beside Charles. Yet this wound originated from within the very walls she called home. The king had not merely permitted his advisors to adjust their position. He had actively authorized Princess and serve as the steadier symbol beside him. Moments before the grand doors of the banquet hall opened, King Charles and Princess found themselves briefly alone in a quiet connecting corridor. Away from palace aides and official photographers, the heavy weight of the evening pressed down upon the king. Charles stood near the archway, carrying the visible exhaustion of a monarch who knew every gesture would be subjected to intense public commentary. He turned to his sister and admitted his private sorrow, stating that he had never intended for the decision to appear cruel. The words carried the unmistakable grief of a husband, not just the formal burden of a sovereign. He was well aware of Camilla's pain and the quiet humiliation she was enduring. Yet, the tragedy of the crown lies in the fact that personal affection must yield when institutional duty demands clarity. Princess responded without false comfort, but with genuine sisterly care. She reminded him that true cruelty would be allowing visible confusion to stand beside the king when the nation required absolute certainty. Her words struck at the absolute heart of the crisis, and was not undermining Camilla. She was stating a fundamental truth of royal survival. If the palace allowed uncertainty to linger during a state banquet, the king would appear divided before visiting foreign leaders and the watching world. Charles then acknowledged the core reality behind his choice. He had turned to him because she had never asked him to choose her. That was the crucial distinction. Camilla required public validation, whereas an embodied pure duty. One sought constant reassurance, while the other simply absorbed responsibility without complaint. When the heavy oak doors finally opened, the visual arrangement spoke with absolute clarity. King Charles stepped forward into the grand hall with Princess, and standing resolute and calm directly at his side. Camilla walked further behind, her posture impeccably regal, yet her distance from the center of power was impossible to hide. By sunrise, official photograph of the banquet had spread across global media outlets. The press described the seating plan as a routine protocol adjustment, but the public recognized the true narrative. Princess had become the defining symbol of royal stability, while Queen Camilla had been subtly moved to the emotional periphery. In the cold geometry of royal life, Love may comfort a sovereign behind closed doors, but unquestioned duty will always sit beside the throne.